One end for a miracle. The words crack through the Christmas music like a gunshot, bouncing off glass and polished silver, louder than the clink of any champagne toast. Laughter erupts from the center table, rolling in hot waves from a circle of men in dark suits and perfect smiles. Fairy lights shimmer overhead, trembling in the cool December air as if they too are startled. Every conversation on the heated patio of Sterling Oaks falters and tilts toward the sound. For one suspended moment, the entire room turns toward a single girl in a red uniform who suddenly cannot feel her own feet. 2 seconds earlier, Camilla Reyes had only been setting down a tray of sparkling water, counting the minutes until her late shift ended. Her back ached, her shoulders burned, and the soles of her shoes felt thin as paper after 12 hours on tile. She knew this table by heart, the expensive cologne, the casual arrogance, the way the men laughed a little too loudly at one another. She was already turning away when the man in the wheelchair jerked, his hand flying to his lower back, his face folding with a sharp, strangled gasp. The tray rattled in her fingers as she watched the pain seize him in a way she had seen before, in a very different life. The patio was a picture for a luxury magazine, white tablecloths glowing under golden lights, tall heaters humming softly, Christmas trees tucked into every corner and dripping in glass ornaments. Couples leaned close over their plates, murmuring about ski trips and winter homes, crystal glasses catching the warm shine. Somewhere inside, a piano played a slow holiday tune, the notes drifting out through the open doors. Camilla's uniform was bright red but plain, her apron faintly frayed at the edges, her black shoes polished past their prime. In that polished world of money and ease, she was the invisible thread holding other people's evenings together. When Gregory Hamilton lifted his head, the pain still clung to his eyes like a shadow, but something colder moved in behind it. Billionaire, developer, owner of Sterling Oaks. His name carried weight in this town, heavier than any legal document. For a heartbeat, Camilla thought he might simply admit that he hurt, that the movement had gone wrong, that he needed a moment. Instead, she watched his expression shift, a slow, theatrical smile spreading across his face, stretching over the remaining tension like new ice over deep water. He saw her standing there, small and startled, and chose his stage. "She thinks she knows what's wrong with me," Gregory announced, his voice gaining volume and shine with every word. His friends leaned in, already chuckling because they did not need to understand the joke to enjoy it. He slapped his hand on the table, sending the wine in his glass trembling up the crystal sides. "Tell you what, gentlemen, let's make this interesting." His gaze pinned Camilla in place, traveling from her cheap black shoes to the tired fear in her eyes. $1 million if you make this pain disappear. 1 million. Right here, right now. The men around him roared with delight, their laughter spilling outward like champagne foam, catching nearby tables in the spray. A woman in a silver dress stopped mid-sentence, her fork hovering above her plate. A couple in the back corner turned in unison, curiosity prying their attention away from their polished phones. Even the servers froze, trays hovering uncertainly in mid-air. The music from inside suddenly felt far away, like something playing in another world. Camilla could feel heat climb up her neck, as if the fairy lights had focused all their glow onto her alone. Gregory leaned back in his wheelchair, enjoying the way the crowd's interest tightened around them. "And if she fails," he added lightly, as if sharing a charming anecdote, "I'll make sure she never works in this town again. No restaurant, no hotel, no cute little coffee shop will touch a waitress who promises miracles and delivers nothing." His friends laughed harder, slapping shoulders, raising glasses, feeding on the power in his cruelty. The words slid through the air like silk and steel, wrapping around Camilla's throat. Somewhere deep inside, something fragile cracked. Her hand went up to her chest without permission, fingers curling into the red fabric as if she could hold her heart still. The patio blurred at the edges, faces became shapes, glasses became points of light. She thought of the 3 months of rent already late, of the pharmacy receipt folded in her apron pocket for her grandmother's medication, of her kid brother waiting at home with a cheap string of dollar store lights around the window, and hope for a small Christmas dinner. She could almost feel each bill perched on her shoulders like invisible stones, pressing her down, daring her to speak or to run. Beneath the panic, another memory rose, stubborn and clear, a bright classroom, the smell of disinfectant and paper, a plastic model spine resting on a metal table. A nursing instructor's voice explaining how grief and fear could lock the body into positions of pain, how certain muscles tightened to protect old wounds until they became prisons. Camilla remembered the taste of cafeteria coffee, the thrill of holding a stethoscope for the first time, the secret certainty that this was what she had been born to do. She also remembered the day she signed the withdrawal form, when tuition and life finally demanded an answer she could not pay. Now, staring at Gregory, she saw beyond the tailored suit jacket and the expensive watch. She saw the way his shoulders hunched just a fraction more than they needed to, the way his breath shortened when he twisted the wrong way, the way his hand had flown to the exact point where the spine bears the weight of a world carried too long alone. Her fear trembled, but recognition settled quietly beneath it, like a small, stubborn light refusing to go out. This was not just agony of bone and muscle. Something older and heavier was folded inside it. Camilla drew a slow breath, the chilled air filling her lungs with the sharpness of reality and the faint scent of pine and roasted meat. Her fingers tightened on the fabric of her uniform until her knuckles whitened, grounding herself in the simple fact that she was standing, that she could move, that she could choose. The patio waited, 100 silent witnesses wrapped in glitter and gold. Then, with her heart beating like a drum in a distant parade, she stepped toward the man in the wheelchair, not as a waitress walking toward a customer, but as a woman approaching a crossroads. And in that small, measured step, everything in her life quietly began to tilt toward a miracle she did not yet dare to name. The laughter did not stop when Camilla stepped away from the table. It only moved farther behind her, thinning out as if someone were slowly turning down the volume on a cruel radio. By the time she pushed through the swinging door into the warmth of the kitchen, the sound had become a hollow echo in her head. The smell of garlic and butter rushed around her, pots hissed on the stove, orders were shouted over the clatter of plates, but everything felt strangely distant. She leaned her back against the cool metal of the fridge, pressing her palm flat against her chest, as if she could push the pounding heart back into place. Her manager barked something about table numbers and dessert menus, but the words slid past her, meaningless, like labels on bottles written in another language. She nodded automatically, picked up a tray of crème brûlée, and walked back into the patio's golden light. The fairy lights still twinkled, the Christmas trees still glowed, and Gregory's table had already moved on to a new story, one of his friends now pantomiming her frightened face to another round of laughter. If anyone noticed the way her hand trembled as she set down the desserts, no one commented. In their world, waitresses were fixtures, not people. Hour by hour, the night thinned out. Guests wrapped scarves around perfect hair and slipped into waiting cars that purred away into the mild winter air. Staff cleared tables, swept crumbs from under chairs, stacked plates into deep grey tubs. Camilla moved through the motions with the automatic precision of exhaustion, but every step seemed to fall into the hollow left by Gregory's voice. $1 million if you make this pain disappear. I'll make sure she never works in this town again. The phrases looped in her mind like a song stuck on repeat, each repetition cutting a little deeper. By the time the last customers drifted out and the heaters clicked off one by one, the patio felt like a stage after the audience has gone home. Empty chairs sat in crooked angles, white cloths stained with the ghosts of red wine and gravy. A single candle still burned in the center of one table, its flame low and tired, wax pooled around its base. Camilla gathered abandoned napkins, stacked empty glasses, and wiped down the surface where Gregory's wheelchair had stood, as if she could erase the imprint of his challenge along with the water rings. The silence pressed in on her, heavy and intimate. In a narrow hallway near the restrooms, she finally stopped. The walls were painted a tasteful shade of cream, lined with framed photographs of sterling oaks in spring and summer, smiling residents walking among flowers and fountains. Camilla slid down until she was sitting on the floor, knees pulled up, apron crumpled in her hands. She listened to the muffled clatter and low voices from the kitchen, the ding of the dish machine, the distant hum of the city beyond the walls. For the first time all evening, she allowed the hot sting behind her eyes to rise, blinking hard until the tears retreated. There was no time to cry. Rent did not care about humiliation. She touched the pocket of her apron, feeling the familiar crinkle of folded receipts and bus tickets. One slip was from the pharmacy, where her grandmother's arthritis pills and heart medication added up to more than any reasonable math allowed. Another was from the landlord, a polite but firm reminder that kindness had limits. On her cracked phone screen, a message from her brother waited, a picture of the tiny artificial tree they had pulled from the top of the closet, decorated with handmade paper stars. "Hurry home, Cammy. Grandma says we'll wait to eat together." The words warmed and ached at the same time. Outside, in the front circle of the building, Gregory Hamilton was being helped into a sleek black car with a ramp that folded out like a tongue. The driver adjusted the straps on his chair, checking the brakes, while the billionaire stared straight ahead, jaw tight. The show was over. His friends had drifted away with claps on the shoulder and murmurs of admiration. In the tinted reflection of the car window, he saw his own face, the deep lines at the corners of his mouth, the shadow of strain around his eyes. As the car pulled away, the old pain crawled back up his spine, like a snake that had merely been stepped aside for a few minutes to entertain the crowd. He shifted, trying to find a position that did not make his muscles scream. And for a fleeting second, the image of Camilla's frightened eyes flashed in his mind. There had been something in them he did not see often anymore. Not pity, not greed, but recognition. The thought bothered him more than he expected. With a low grunt, he pushed it away, focusing instead on the familiar walls of his mansion, waiting at the top of the hill, the expensive furniture, the controlled lighting, the drugs lined up in neat little bottles on his bedside table. Pain he could manage. Pride he had promised himself long ago he would never surrender. Back inside, Camilla shrugged into her thin coat and stepped out into the night. The air had cooled, though no snow fell this far south. Instead, the sky stretched dark and clear above the glowing complex, stars faint against the city haze. She walked to the bus stop at the edge of the property, boots scuffing the pavement, the fairy lights of Sterling Oaks fading behind her like a memory that hadn't decided whether to be beautiful or cruel. She wrapped her arms around herself, more for comfort than for warmth, and tried not to replay the scene again. The more she did, the more that one sentence pushed forward through the rest. Maybe I know what's happening. The bus arrived with a tired hiss and a squeal of brakes, nearly empty at that late hour. Camilla chose a seat by the window, pressed her forehead lightly against the cool glass, and watched the world slip by in streaks of light and shadow. Apartment buildings with peeling paint, corner stores still open with humming refrigerators, a church with a glowing nativity scene on the lawn. All of it rolled past like scenes from someone else's life. Somewhere between one stop and the next, she whispered into the quiet space between her heartbeat and the hum of the engine. Maybe I really do The admission frightened her because, if she was right, the game he had started was far more dangerous for both of them than anyone on that patio understood. When the bus finally rattled to her corner, she stepped down onto the cracked sidewalk and started the short walk home, the echo of Gregory's laughter trailing her like a shadow she could not shake off. Above her, a single star shone a little brighter through the thin clouds, but she did not notice. Her mind was still on the man in the wheelchair, on the way his hand had grabbed his back, on the way his joke had wrapped itself around a real, desperate pain. And as she reached for her keys, hearing her family's voices through the thin apartment door, she carried with her a question she could not yet name, but that would not let her rest. Camilla woke before the sun, long before her alarm, as if the weight of last night had pressed her awake. The apartment was still dark, the only light coming from a cracked hallway bulb, flickering in tired pulses. She slipped quietly from her thin blanket so she wouldn't wake her grandmother, who slept in the living room recliner. The old woman's breathing was soft, steady, touched by the faint wheeze of winter air. Camilla stood still for a moment, watching her, the memory of Gregory's laughter burning behind her ribs. In the kitchen, she warmed leftover rice and eggs, the pan hissing loudly in the silence. Her little brother shuffled in, rubbing his eyes, hair sticking up in every direction. He plopped into a chair and grinned at her with the easy trust of someone too young to recognize the dangers of last night's humiliation. She ruffled his hair, masking her worry with a soft smile. The room smelled of cinnamon, detergent, and the faint mint cream her grandmother used for sore joints. Every scent reminded her why she could not afford to fall apart. While her brother ate, Camilla packed her grandmother's pills into a small weekly box, carefully counting the amber tablets under the weak kitchen light. Each click of plastic echoed the same truth. There was never enough money, never enough hours, never enough certainty that tomorrow would be kinder. She traced one finger along the cracked edge of the counter, remembering a time when she used to study here, notebooks spread out beside a cup of instant coffee. She could still see her own handwriting on old flashcards tucked in a drawer. Back then, she had believed in a future shaped by her own hands. She had walked into the nursing program with a cheap backpack, a borrowed stethoscope, and a heart full of purpose. She remembered the bright lecture hall, the scent of alcohol wipes, the way the plastic spine model creaked when passed down rows of students. She remembered the first time she stabilized a practice dummy's neck and felt something inside her settle, as if her life had clicked into alignment. Healing was not her career, it was her instinct, but dreams do not survive on instinct alone. Tuition rose, hours at work grew longer, and the fragile balance between duty and ambition cracked. She dropped classes one by one, then all at once, each withdrawal form feeling like a quiet betrayal of who she wanted to be. Her grandmother insisted that God saw her sacrifice. Her brother hugged her legs and told her she was still the smartest person he knew. But at night, lying awake in the small shared bedroom, Camilla felt hollowed out, as if someone had scooped the future right out of her chest. Across town, in a penthouse of glass and steel, Gregory Hamilton woke to a very different morning, but one no less haunted. His assistant had left breakfast on the marble counter, untouched. Pain prickled up his spine as he pushed himself upright in bed, muttering under his breath. The city stretched below him in glittering lines, cars crawling through the dawn traffic like ants carrying unseen burdens. Though surrounded by opulence, he felt the familiar weight of his emptiness settle at the base of his ribs. His home was quiet, in the way expensive places often are. Too clean, too still, too controlled. Framed photos lined a hallway. Gregory with his wife at a charity gala, holding their newborn daughter, posing at a groundbreaking ceremony for Sterling Oaks. But the later years told a different story. His daughter's pictures appeared less frequently. His wife's illness hollowed her face in the frames, and then, abruptly, the photos stopped altogether. He had sealed the rest of his memories in drawers he never opened. Better to forget than to feel the ways he had failed them. The pain in his back had started not long after his wife's funeral, creeping in quietly like an unwelcome guest. At first, he blamed long hours, bad posture, stress, but deep inside, he knew it wasn't just his spine that had buckled. Grief had a way of settling into bone and muscle, tightening like knots no hands could reach. Doctors prescribed pills, therapists suggested rest. Gregory dismissed them all, preferring the illusion of strength over the vulnerability of healing. Pride had always been easier than honesty. Now, as he wheeled himself through the silent kitchen, he replayed the scene from the patio, not the laughter, not the challenge, but the look in Camilla's eyes. There had been fear, yes, but also something unsettling, understanding. She had seen something beneath his arrogance that he did not allow anyone to see. The thought irritated him because it made him feel exposed. It also unsettled him because it felt uncomfortably true. He rubbed his lower back, jaw tightening, pushing away the flicker of recognition. And somewhere between an empty penthouse and a modest apartment, two people carried the same quiet ache, one from the weight of dreams lost too soon, the other from love abandoned too late. Neither knew it yet, but their wounds traced the same shape, as if life had drawn a matching scar across both their hearts. As the morning unfolded, a faint, unspoken question lingered in the air between them, a question that would change everything. What if the miracle he mocked was the one they both needed most? Camilla arrived at Sterling Oaks the next afternoon with her stomach knotted, hoping to blend into the routine of bussing tables and refilling water glasses. But before she could even clock in, the hostess intercepted her with a tight smile that wasn't really a smile at all. "Manager wants to see you," the woman murmured, eyes flicking away as if looking directly at Camilla might get her in trouble. The hallway to the office felt longer than usual, its framed photos suddenly sharp and cold. By the time she reached the door, her palms were damp with dread. Inside, the air felt heavier, too still for a holiday weekend. Her manager sat stiffly behind the desk, hands clasped, face strained. Beside him sat a man in a dark suit, briefcase at his feet, expression unreadable. And near the window, turned slightly away as if inspecting the Christmas decorations outside, waited Gregory Hamilton in his wheelchair. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes carried the polished gleam of someone who had rehearsed a performance. A thin smile curved at the edges of his mouth when he finally acknowledged her. "Miss Reyes," he said, voice dripping with courtesy that felt more like a threat. "We should discuss last night's misunderstanding." He gestured lightly toward the lawyer, who opened the briefcase with a soft metallic click. Papers slid out, long white official pages that looked nothing like misunderstandings and everything like traps. Camilla stayed near the door, heart pounding, knowing instinctively that stepping closer meant giving away ground she did not have to spare. Her manager cleared his throat, eyes full of apology he wasn't brave enough to voice. "Gregory and his legal team are reviewing your conduct," he muttered, shifting uncomfortably. "There were concerns expressed about professionalism, about claims you made." Camilla felt her breath halt, her body going cold. She hadn't made any claims. She had only spoken a thought, softly, privately, before his laughter turned it into ammunition. The unfairness scraped raw across her ribs. Gregory leaned forward, folding his hands with theatrical politeness. "You implied you knew something my doctors didn't," he said. "That's a strong assertion for someone in your position." His tone softened, as if offering kindness he didn't believe in. "But I don't wish to ruin your career, unless I must. So I propose we formalize our little wager." The lawyer slid the first page across the desk, its lines neat and merciless. Camilla stared at it as if it were written in a language designed to swallow people whole. The terms were chilling. She was to assist him in good faith with his pain, undefined, unprotected, unprofessional. If she refused or interfered with his care, he could pursue disciplinary action and defamation claims. If she succeeded, the payment mentioned the spirit of a reward, not a guarantee. Every line bent toward him, every comma waited to trip her. Her throat tightened with the cruel elegance of it. He had turned humiliation into paperwork, spectacle into leverage. Camilla lifted her eyes, meeting his with a steadiness she did not feel. "I never said I could heal you," she whispered. "Only that I might understand what was happening." Gregory tilted his head, amused. "Then this should be easy for you." The lawyer's pen clicked, ready to move the process along. The room felt smaller, the walls inching closer with each second. Her manager looked down, defeated. No one was going to save her, not from this, not from him. But something sparked quietly inside her, a slow burning ember that refused to die. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small notepad, the same one she used to take orders. She wrote a single sentence, tore the page neatly, and placed it on the desk. "I'll agree," she said softly, "but on one condition." The lawyer frowned, reaching for the note. Gregory watched with sudden interest, as if curious to see how far a cornered waitress would go. The page was simple, handwritten, uneven, no legal phrasing or hidden traps. It said only, "I am allowed to tell the truth if asked." The lawyer looked baffled. Gregory's smile faded by a shade. Camilla felt a tremor of fear at her own audacity, but she didn't look away. She needed one line of protection, one thin thread of honesty she could cling to if everything collapsed. For a long moment, the room held its breath. Finally, Gregory's jaw tightened, and he gave a brief, dismissive nod. "Fine," he said, "it changes nothing." But something in his voice betrayed discomfort, a tiny crack in his polished facade. The lawyer added the note to the file with a shrug. Camilla exhaled slowly, relief mingling with dread. She had agreed. The game was now real, and as she left the office, the thin scrap of paper felt heavier than any signature. Deep down, she sensed that the truth she'd insisted on keeping would soon cost far more than she understood. Camilla spent the rest of the afternoon hunched over her cracked phone at the kitchen table, scrolling through pages with the speed of desperation. Symptoms, nerve compression diagrams, articles about chronic pain, anything that might help her understand the way Gregory's back had seized beneath his expensive suit. Notes filled her small notepad in cramped handwriting, squeezed between grocery reminders and bus schedules. The kitchen smelled faintly of dish soap and boiled rice, familiar scents grounding her as she chased answers she once studied in real classrooms. Her neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, a retired nurse with soft eyes and a spine that still carried the authority of her old job, sat across from her sipping tea. When Camilla described the sudden twist, the grimace, the way Gregory braced himself, the older woman nodded slowly. "He's holding something deeper than injury," she murmured, tapping her finger against the table. "Pain like that. Sometimes it's grief tightening the body until it screams." Camilla felt those words settle inside her, heavy and true. They matched the instinct she'd been trying to ignore. At Sterling Oaks that evening, the therapy room buzzed with soft chatter and low holiday music. Residents moved slowly through their exercises, some with walkers, some with therapists guiding their hands. Gregory sat apart, arms crossed, jaw tight, watching the room like a king surveying a kingdom he no longer trusted. When Camilla stepped in, every muscle in her body clenched, but she approached anyway. He didn't greet her. He simply raised one eyebrow, as if daring her to justify her presence. She asked quiet, simple questions at first, when the pain began, whether it changed with movement, if mornings were worse. He responded with clipped sarcasm, clearly performing for the staff nearby. Yet beneath the mockery, there was something careful in the way he shifted his weight, as if afraid the next motion might betray him. When she asked about stress around the time it started, a flicker, not even a second, crossed his face, like a light bulb dimming in a storm. It vanished before she could hold on to it. Camilla asked him to sit forward while she stood behind his chair. He scoffed, but did it anyway. She guided him to breathe into a certain point, to release pressure he was unconsciously holding. Her hands hovered, not touching, just observing the way his shoulders rose unevenly, the subtle twist in his spine, the locked tension near his ribs. "You brace," she murmured, almost to herself, not just against pain, against memory. Gregory stiffened instantly, his body becoming stone. The room felt colder. She demonstrated a small movement, barely a tilt, barely a lift, meant to loosen the muscles around the lumbar curve. He followed reluctantly, eyes narrowed, but the effect was immediate. The sharp edge of his pain dulled, easing just enough to make him suck in a surprised breath. His fingers twitched against the armrest, as if unsure whether to trust the relief or resent it. For a moment, the arrogance slipped. The real man flickered through. But the mask returned just as quickly. "Beginner's luck," he muttered. His dismissiveness cut deeper than she expected, but she held her calm. Healing, even partial, was never instant. And this man, with his grief sealed beneath wealth and pride, carried more than strained muscles. She stepped back, jotting notes into her small pad, ignoring the way his friends snickered from across the room. Their laughter landed differently now, not just cruel, but hollow, like people afraid to face their own shadows. Gregory avoided her eyes completely, as if looking at her meant admitting something he wasn't ready to face. When her time was up, she thanked the therapist and left without waiting for approval. The hallway outside felt cooler, quieter, more honest somehow. She leaned against the wall, breathing deeply, letting the mixture of hope and uncertainty settle. For the first time since the bet began, she believed she might truly understand the shape of his suffering. But understanding was not the same as winning, and the stakes, her job, her dignity, her family, loomed large in every breath. Outside, the winter fog had rolled in, thick and low, curling around the lampposts like quiet ghosts. Camilla pulled her coat tight and started down the path toward the bus stop, the soft crunch of gravel marking her steps. Every few paces, the memory of Gregory's brief, involuntary relief replayed in her mind, like a candle's flame catching before being snuffed out. It wasn't much, it wasn't a miracle, but it was real, and real was a dangerous kind of hope. As she waited for the bus, breath fogging in the air, the weight of the night pressed around her, fear, responsibility, possibility, all tangled together. She didn't know if she had the strength to change anything for a man who seemed determined to stay unchanged. But somewhere deep inside, beneath exhaustion and doubt, something whispered that she had stepped onto a path she could not turn back from. And the smallest spark of hope, fragile, trembling, traveled with her into the dark. Gregory summoned Camilla to his mansion the following evening with a message delivered through the front desk. Polite, formal, and unmistakably commanding. She stood at the bottom of the long driveway, staring at the sprawling house glowing with professionally arranged Christmas lights. It looked like a postcard, flawless and cold, the kind of beauty that felt rehearsed rather than lived in. With every step she took toward the front door, the air seemed to thicken around her, as if the building itself expected perfection. She swallowed hard and pressed the doorbell. A housekeeper answered, her posture sharp and efficient, guiding Camilla through hallways lined with expensive art she didn't recognize. The silence felt heavy, like the house disapproved of footsteps that lacked wealth. She passed a grand piano covered in dust, unmoved for years, and a row of stockings hung perfectly on a mantel, each embroidered with names, though no one stood beneath them. When she reached the library, Gregory was waiting, posture regal in his chair, chin lifted. He didn't greet her, he merely gestured for her to begin. Tonight, the audience was different. No friends, no staff. Just the persistent ticking of a grandfather clock and the faint scent of cedar logs burning behind a glass fireplace. Gregory's eyes tracked her with cool curiosity, as if watching a performer rather than a person. "You'll come here every evening until Christmas," he said casually, as though assigning chores to a servant. "We'll see what you can do without your little audience cheering you on." His voice carried an edge she recognized, fear wrapped in arrogance. She inhaled slowly before approaching him, noting the way his shoulders curled protectively forward, the slight tension pulling at his ribs, the stiffness in his breath. She asked him to shift, to twist gently, to breathe deeper. He obeyed, but only halfway, stopping whenever obedience brushed too close to vulnerability. Still, she kept her tone calm, explaining each movement with the same soft patience she once used in her clinical labs. The room remained silent except for his controlled breaths and the occasional crackle from the fire. Between exercises, her eyes wandered across the room. Family photos lined the shelves, some vibrant, some faded. A younger Gregory with a woman radiant in a winter coat. The same woman years later, thinner, paler, leaning into him with tired eyes. A little girl with a gap-toothed smile clinging to his arm. But as the years marched across the frames, the girl's presence thinned like a fading melody. In later photos, she was simply gone. Camilla's stomach tightened with quiet understanding. At one point, as she guided him into a posture adjustment, she whispered, almost without meaning to, "You miss her." The words slipped out, soft as breath. Gregory froze, his muscles turning rigid under her guidance. A beat of silence filled the room, heavy and sharp. Then he shot her a glare so cold it could have snuffed out the fireplace. "You're here to address physical pain," he snapped, "not to interpret my life." His voice cracked slightly on the last word, just enough for her to hear it. She apologized gently, stepping back, but the truth lingered like a scent in the air. His pride bristled, forming a hard shell around a wound he refused to acknowledge. Her presence, her intuition, her careful eyes, they threatened that shell in ways he couldn't control. To reclaim the upper hand, he rang for the housekeeper and ordered drinks for his guests arriving later. "You'll serve tonight," he added carelessly. "Might as well be useful while you're here." The cruelty returned with practiced ease. By the time his friends arrived, wealthy men with booming voices and polished watches, Gregory had fully reacquired his mask. They joked about his personal miracle worker, nudging each other with smirks that made Camilla feel like a prop in a play she never auditioned for. She served whiskey, cleaned glasses, ignored the sideways glances. But beneath her quiet obedience, she watched Gregory closely. Every laugh he forced, every proud gesture only deepened the shadow behind his eyes. Pride had become his armor and his prison. When the guests finally left, the mansion fell into a lonely hush. Gregory remained in his chair, staring at a family portrait near the piano, his face unreadable. For a moment, Camilla saw the truth beneath the arrogance. A man terrified that letting go of pride meant facing years of regret. She gathered her things, offering a quiet "good night," but he didn't answer. His gaze stayed fixed on the portrait, as if the silence inside it knew something he didn't dare remember. Outside, the night air felt gentler than the house behind her. Camilla walked down the long driveway, the echo of Gregory's forced laughter trailing her like a ghost. She knew now that the pain in his back was just the surface of something deeper, something long avoided, tightly locked and fiercely protected. And as she reached the bus stop, the truth settled heavy in her chest. Miracles never begin with magic. They begin with wounds, and his were only just beginning to reveal themselves. The next evening, the mansion felt different the moment Camilla stepped inside. The lights were dimmer, the air heavier, as if the walls themselves sensed a storm gathering behind closed doors. Gregory sat in the living room near the Christmas tree, his posture sharp, shoulders rigid, eyes burning with something colder than pride. She greeted him softly, expecting another night of tense exercises, but he didn't nod or gesture for her to begin. Instead, he watched her with a stillness that made her pulse tighten. She approached carefully, noting the way his fingers curled against the armrest, the faint tremor running through his jaw. "You're in pain," she murmured, instinct guiding her forward. "Let me help." But he cut her off with a short, bitter laugh. "No," he said, voice low and dangerous. "Tonight, we're not doing your little routines. Tonight, we're talking about boundaries." His tone carried the warning of a blade being unsheathed. Something in the room shifted, tense and brittle. Camilla stepped back, confused. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked gently. Gregory's expression darkened. "You did," he snapped. "You opened your mouth about things that aren't your concern." He reached for a remote, turning off the soft Christmas music that filled the room. Silence crashed down like ice. "You mentioned my daughter," he continued. "You crossed a line I didn't give you permission to cross." The sting in his voice was sharp enough to split the air. Her breath caught. She wanted to explain that it had slipped out, that the photos on his shelves had spoken louder than any words he had ever said. But before she could respond, his voice rose again, louder, harsher. "You think you understand my life because you touched my back for 5 minutes, he demanded. "You think you can read grief like a chart." His breathing grew uneven, the pain sharpening, but his anger overpowered everything else. Pride had swallowed restraint whole. She tried to calm him, raising her hands as if quieting a frightened animal. "Gregory, I didn't mean to judge." But he slammed his fist against the armrest. "You judged, you assumed, and you embarrassed me." The accusation hit a wound she hadn't expected. He wheeled himself closer, stopping only inches from her, his eyes blazing with years of denied grief. "This ends now," he said through clenched teeth. "The bet, the arrangement, everything. I'm done." The words landed like a closing door inside her chest. She took a step back, feeling the weight of everything she had risked, her job, her future, her family, crashed toward her like falling stone. "But you asked for my help," she whispered. "You insisted I come." Gregory scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "And now I'm insisting you leave. My lawyer will handle the rest." The cold finality of it drained the last bit of warmth from the room. The following morning, the consequences came swiftly. Camilla arrived at the restaurant only to be met with whispered stares and a manager who couldn't meet her eyes. "There were reports," he muttered. "Concerns about your professionalism. Accusations you tried to diagnose a resident without qualification." The words were scripted, rehearsed, clearly fed to him by someone with far more power. When he finally said she was being let go, her knees nearly buckled. The world spun, news traveled fast. Rumors unfurled across town like cruel ribbons, suggesting she had pretended to be a miracle worker, that she had manipulated a vulnerable man, that she had caused a scene at Sterling Oaks. Doors began to close before she even reached them. Her grandmother's health worsened that same day, and the landlord's notice, stamped in red, waited on the kitchen table like a verdict. By evening, everything she relied on was slipping through her fingers. Hope felt thin as breath. Back at the restaurant to collect her belongings, she moved quietly through the locker room, the dim lights flickering overhead. Then she noticed something on the floor near her open locker. A plain white envelope, worn at the edges as if it had been stuffed between coats and fallen unnoticed. Her name wasn't on it, but Gregory's was, written in a woman's elegant handwriting. Heart pounding, she lifted it carefully, the paper soft from age. It had never been opened. She held it in both hands, feeling the quiet weight of secrets pressed between the sealed folds. A wrong move could ruin everything. A right move might save a man who had just destroyed her life. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air thinning, as if pulling her toward the inevitable, and as she stared at the unopened letter, knowing it had fallen from Gregory's coat, one truth struck her with frightening clarity. This was the key to the pain he feared more than death itself. The seal was still unbroken, and her fingers trembled on its edge. Camilla sat on the edge of her bed, long after midnight, the small apartment wrapped in shadows and the faint glow of streetlights leaking through the blinds. The unopened letter lay across her knees like a fragile piece of forbidden magic. Her grandmother slept in the recliner with a soft wheeze, a blanket pulled to her chin. Her younger brother dozed on the couch, one arm dangling over the side, unaware that their entire future was trembling in Camilla's hands. The quiet pressed in from all corners, making the sealed envelope feel impossibly loud. She ran her thumb along the edge of the flap, the paper soft and aged, its corners slightly bent. The handwriting, so delicate, so unmistakably feminine, held something intimate and aching. Whoever wrote it had once loved Gregory deeply, or had once been loved by him. Camilla's pulse thudded as she imagined the letter sitting in his coat pocket for years, untouched, unseen, ignored. Why would a man keep a letter he never intended to open? What grief had been buried so tightly that he refused even to look at it? The memory of his rage echoed through her chest. You crossed a line. You embarrassed me. The arrangement is over. Each phrase replayed like a bruise being pressed. She wasn't sure what hurt more, his cruelty or the knowledge that some part of her had seen the real man beneath the armor, the one trapped behind years of unspoken regret. She had wanted to help him. She still did, but the cost of caring had already begun to bleed into her life. She placed the letter on the nightstand, then stood to pace quietly, careful not to wake her family. Every step stirred a storm inside her. She had lost her job. Her reputation was crumbling. Rent was overdue. Her grandmother's medicine schedule depended entirely on her next paycheck, which no longer existed. And yet the thought of returning the unopened letter to Gregory, without knowing what was inside, felt unbearable, like turning away from a locked door she knew she was meant to open. Her gaze drifted to the small cross hanging above the doorway, tarnished, simple, inherited from her grandmother's mother. It had watched over every Christmas, every prayer, every hardship. Camilla's voice caught in her throat as she whispered into the quiet, "What am I supposed to do?" Her breath trembled. "If I open it, it's our sin. If I don't—" She looked back at the envelope, its silent call tugging at her heart. "Then I'm blind to the truth I need." Finally, she sat again, hands shaking as she lifted the letter. The apartment felt suspended in time, the air still, the world holding its breath. Her fingers hovered, trembling inches from the seal. She imagined the woman writing it, pouring her fear, her hope, her last attempt at reaching a man who'd been shutting doors for years. This was not a letter meant for her eyes, but she also knew, with painful certainty, that the truth inside it was tied to Gregory's suffering and to the unraveling of her own life. The paper tore with the softest sigh, like a secret exhaling after being held in too long. Camilla unfolded the letter with careful, reverent hands. The handwriting danced across the page in lines full of yearning and grief. It wasn't from a stranger. It wasn't from a patient. It was from a daughter, Emma. She begged him to come to a Christmas recital for her son, pleaded for him to stop running from the memories of her mother, and asked him to choose family over fear. Each sentence felt like a wound reopening. Camilla read the date again. The letter was years old, years, written long before the pain overtook his back, long before he turned his grief into arrogance, long before he sealed himself inside the fortress of Sterling Oaks. By the time she reached the last line, "Dad, I need you." "He needs you. Please don't disappear from us too." Her vision blurred with tears she had tried so hard to swallow. She pressed the folded page against her forehead, feeling its truth seep into her, heavy and heartbreaking. Gregory hadn't just ignored the letter, he had carried it with him, unopened like a confession he was too afraid to face. She closed her eyes and whispered, "God, what do I do with this?" Her voice cracked under the weight of it all. She wasn't a miracle worker. She wasn't a doctor. She was just a girl trying to keep her family afloat. But now she held the key to a man's deepest wound, a wound so old and so raw it had carved itself into his body. As dawn approached, pale and hesitant, Camilla sat on her bed with the letter resting in her lap, her heart caught between guilt and compassion, between fear and duty. One truth settled quietly, chilling and certain. She could not walk away from this now. But what waited on the other side of this truth, she was not ready to face. The next morning, Camilla walked towards Sterling Oaks with the letter tucked carefully inside her coat, the weight of it pressing against her like a second heartbeat. The winter air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine from the decorated walkways. She didn't have a job here anymore, no uniform, no shift to clock into. Yet her feet moved with quiet certainty toward the gates. Fear whispered at the edges of her thoughts, warning her she had no right to return, but something deeper, steadier, guided her forward. She needed answers. At the front desk, a young receptionist blinked in surprise when she recognized her. "Camilla, I thought—" But before the woman could finish, Camilla gently placed a hand on the counter. "I just need to speak to someone from the medical team," she said. Her voice was soft, but unshakably firm. The receptionist hesitated only a moment before pointing her toward the garden wing. Camilla whispered a quick thank you and walked down the familiar hallway, her heart pounding with every step. The small garden behind the therapy center was quiet, touched with winter sunlight. Lights wrapped around bare branches like strands of sleeping fireflies. A few residents sat outside under blankets, watching the day unfold. On a bench dusted with frost, Nurse Harriet, the kind woman who had always treated Camilla with gentle respect, looked up with warm surprise. "Honey, you look like you haven't slept," she said softly, patting the seat beside her. "Sit. Talk to me." Camilla sat, hands clasped tightly in her lap. She didn't mention the letter, not yet. She simply described Gregory's pain, the way he braced, the sudden flashes of vulnerability he tried desperately to hide. Harriet listened with a solemn patience that soothed Camilla's fraying nerves. When she finally spoke, her voice held a kind of quiet knowing. "Pain like his doesn't come only from the body," she murmured. "He carries something heavy, something he won't face." Camilla hesitated before asking, "Do you know anything about his daughter?" Harriet nodded slowly, eyes clouding. "Emma," she said. "Bright girl, kind. She was the heart of this place before everything broke." She explained that after Gregory's wife passed, grief hardened him. He pushed Emma away with silence and pride, refusing help, refusing comfort, refusing connection. "He lost her long before she walked out," Harriet whispered, "and he knows it." As they talked, the facility's longtime driver, Mr. Coleman, shuffled out to join them, leaning on his cane. When he overheard Emma's name, he sighed, heavy with memory. "Every Christmas," he said, "he had me drive past the school where her recital used to be held, said he liked the lights." Coleman's voice dipped. "Booty never went inside, not once, just watched from the car." The sadness in his words hung in the cold air, as fragile as frost. Camilla felt the weight of the letter pulse against her ribs, as if urging her to speak. But she wasn't ready, not yet. Instead, she asked quietly, "Do you think he regrets it?" Harriet and Coleman exchanged a look full of unspoken truths. "Regret," Harriet murmured. "Darling, his whole back is knotted with regret. That man has been carrying the same moment for years." Camilla closed her eyes, imagining Gregory's spine locked like a door that refused to open, no matter how hard life pushed. The Christmas gala would be held that evening, a lavish event for donors and residents, the kind of night where every corner sparkled. From where she sat, Camilla could see the ballroom windows being polished, decorations being set, trays of silverware being arranged with military precision. She knew Gregory would be there. She knew Emma had been invited by the board. And she knew with a clarity that bordered on destiny that tonight mattered more than any other. She rose from the bench, her breath misting in the cold air. "Thank you," she whispered, pressing Harriet's hand. She turned to Coleman with a soft nod of gratitude. Then she stepped back toward the main building, her heart trembling with purpose. She didn't have a job, a uniform, or an invitation, but she had truth, and she had a letter carrying years of unspoken love, regret, and pain. As she walked away, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the frozen garden. Something inside her steadied, something brave, something hopeful. Tonight, she would step into the gala, whether she belonged there or not. And with every breath, she felt the faint spark that had been flickering inside her since the night of the bet begin to glow a little brighter. A flicker of hope, fragile, trembling, but finally alive. Camilla entered the Sterling Oaks ballroom through the service hallway, her breath tight, heart pounding beneath the borrowed catering jacket. The corridor hummed with hurried footsteps and clinking trays as staff prepared for the Christmas gala, oblivious to the storm she carried inside her coat. When she stepped into the glittering room, the light nearly blinded her. Crystal chandeliers, shimmering like frozen stars, garlands of gold, looping around marble columns, a towering Christmas tree crowned with a shining angel. She didn't belong among the silk dresses and tailored suits, not tonight, not ever. But she was here for a reason far deeper than belonging. Destiny had called her back. Guests mingled in gentle waves across the ballroom, their laughter rising and falling like holiday music. Camilla kept her head down, weaving between clusters of people as she carried trays of hors d'oeuvres with steady hands. She scanned the room until she found him. Gregory Hamilton at the center table, dressed impeccably, posture stiff, face expressionless. His wheelchair gleamed under the lights, polished and cold. Even from across the room, she could see the flicker of discomfort in the way he shifted, his pain never truly silent, yet tonight he wore pride like armor. Then she saw Emma. She stood near the entrance, uncertain, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. A teenage boy, her son, hovered by her side, wide-eyed and shy in a small blazer. Emma's eyes searched the room with equal parts longing and dread. Camilla felt her chest tighten. This woman, the writer of the unopened letter, carried grief as visibly as the ornaments hanging from the tree, bright, fragile, trembling. When Emma's gaze finally landed on Gregory across the room, she froze, breath catching like someone seeing a ghost. Gregory noticed her next, just a flicker, a hitch in his expression, a tightening of the jaw. His hand gripped the armrest of his chair. Pain shot through him. She could see it from where she stood, yet he didn't move toward his daughter. He didn't motion her over. He stayed still, pride locking his body more tightly than any injury ever could. The air in the ballroom changed, as if the entire room sensed the fracture rekindling between them. Emma gathered courage, walking toward him with her son in tow. Her steps were careful, almost timid, each one carrying years of unspoken hurt. When she reached the table, Gregory's friends went silent, their earlier laughter dying in their throats. Emma's voice, soft and trembling, barely carried over the music. "Dad," she said, her lips forming the word like it might shatter her. Gregory's eyes flickered, a storm of emotion swirling behind them, but he gave only a stiff nod, a brittle greeting shaped by years of distance. She tried again. "I came because they said you wanted me here." Gregory's expression hardened. "The board invited you," he corrected sharply, "not me." The words sliced through the space between them, sharp as broken glass. Emma flinched. Her son shifted uncomfortably, his small shoulders tensing as the wound exposed itself. Camilla watched from across the room, throat tightening. This was the moment the letter had been begging him to prevent, the moment he still refused to choose love over fear. Emma nodded slowly, swallowing the hurt with practiced grace. "Then we won't stay," she whispered. She turned, guiding her son away from the table with careful dignity. Camilla felt something inside her snap, an ache so old it didn't belong to her, yet she carried it like her own. Emma reached the doors of the ballroom, blinking rapidly, her breath uneven. No one followed her, no one called after her. Not even Gregory. Camilla placed her tray on the nearest table and stepped quickly through the crowd, weaving between glittering gowns and crisp tuxedos. The hallway outside the ballroom was quieter, lit only by wreath-lined sconces and soft golden bulbs. She found Emma near the exit, coat draped over her arms, eyes glistening with unshed tears. The boy stood beside her, trying hard to be brave. Camilla approached with slow, respectful steps. "Wait," she breathed. "Please." Emma blinked in surprise, confusion mixing with grief. Camilla reached into her coat and pulled out the letter, the one written with hope and pain, sealed for years, unopened until last night. Her hands trembled as she held it out. "He never read it," Camilla said gently. "But I did. And you deserve to know that your words, they didn't go unheard. They just never reached him." Emma's breath hitched as she stared at the familiar handwriting, years collapsing into a single moment. For a long heartbeat, the hallway held only quiet, the fragile kind born between breaking and healing. Emma looked from the letter to Camilla, her eyes filling with a sorrow so deep it trembled into gratitude. "Why are you helping me?" she whispered. Camilla swallowed hard, her own heart unsteady. "Because he's hurting," she said softly, "and you're the only one who can reach where the pain actually lives." And as Emma lowered her gaze to the letter in her hands, torn between fear and possibility, a quiet tension thickened the air, a tension that would soon pull Gregory into a confrontation he could no longer outrun. The night air outside the ballroom was sharp, cold enough to make each breath bloom like smoke. Emma stood frozen beneath the golden sconces, staring at the unopened letter as if it were a living thing. Her son hovered beside her, clutching her coat sleeve, sensing the tremor in her silence. Camilla stayed close but didn't push. She knew this moment wasn't hers to lead. It belonged to a mother, a daughter, and the truth buried between them. "Read it," Camilla whispered gently. "Please." Emma slipped her finger under the torn flap, unfolding the paper with trembling hands. The handwriting, her own from years ago, looked younger, more hopeful, untouched by the disappointment that came afterward. She drew a shaky breath and began reading aloud, the plea for her father to come to her son's recital, the confession of how much his absence had hollowed her, the final desperate line begging him not to disappear. Her voice cracked halfway through, but she forced herself to keep reading word by aching word. Behind them, the door to the ballroom clicked open. A shadow moved across the threshold. Gregory Hamilton rolled slowly into the hallway, Mr. Coleman quietly steering his wheelchair from behind. Gregory's face was pale, jaw set tight as steel, but his eyes, those proud, guarded eyes, were fixed on his daughter. Camilla felt her breath seize. He had followed them. Whether out of anger or instinct, he had followed. A pulse of fate rippled through the corridor. Emma didn't notice him at first, but when she reached the final line, "Dad, I need you," He needs you. Please don't disappear from us too. Her voice broke entirely. The sound echoed down the hallway like a wound splitting open. Gregory flinched as if struck. His hand shot to the armrest, gripping it so tightly the leather groaned under his fingers. Emma finally looked up, and when their eyes met, the years of distance between them collapsed into raw, trembling silence. You... Her voice shook. You carried this with you, all this time, and you didn't even open it. Gregory swallowed hard, the tendons in his neck tightening. I couldn't, he rasped. I wasn't ready. His words were thin, fragile, stripped of every ounce of arrogance. For a moment he looked smaller, older, wounded in ways deeper than painkillers could touch. Emma blinked through tears, hurt and disbelief warring across her face. You weren't ready to show up for your grandson, for me. The boy stepped closer, tugging Emma's sleeve as if grounding her. Gregory looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. Something broke behind his eyes. Not loudly, not dramatically, but like the quiet snap of a brittle thread pulled too tight. His breath hitched, and Camilla saw the moment his chest tightened, the familiar spasm flickering through his spine. The pain didn't come from a slipped disc this time. It came from the years he had tried to outrun. Camilla knelt beside him, her voice low, steady. This is where the pain lives, she murmured. Not in your back. Here. She lifted a gentle hand toward his chest, not touching, just indicating the hollow he'd carved inside himself. Gregory's breathing grew uneven, torn between sorrow and denial. His gaze darted to Camilla, a flicker of recognition lighting behind his eyes. He knew she was right. He had always known it. But knowing and facing were different beasts entirely. Emma wiped her tears with the back of her hand, anger swirling with unbearable tenderness. I tried, she whispered. I reached out, I begged, and you left us standing alone. Gregory closed his eyes, as if he could shut out the memories. But truth, once spoken, could not be dismissed. The silence between them thickened, heavy as snowfall. In that stillness, Camilla felt time tighten, like the universe bracing for what would come next. Suddenly, Gregory's breath hitched sharply. His body stiffened, pain shooting through him so violently his hand slipped from the armrest. The wheelchair jerked. He lurched forward, balance tipping toward the marble floor. Camilla lunged, Emma gasped, the boy cried out. But the world seemed to move in slow motion as Gregory's weight pitched dangerously, and just before he fell, just before the truth ripped entirely free, Gregory choked out a single, shattering whisper. It wasn't my back hurting. It was the empty chair beside me, the one I refused to turn toward. His body swayed, and the hallway froze as he began to fall. Gregory didn't hit the marble floor. Camilla caught his arm just in time, bracing her weight against his, while Emma steadied the other side with trembling hands. His grandson stood frozen, eyes wide, unsure whether to help or to cry. Mr. Coleman rushed forward, adjusting the wheelchair to keep it from slipping further. When Gregory finally sank back into the seat, his chest rose and fell in sharp, uneven breaths, not from the physical strain, but from the truth that had just torn through him. The hallway thickened with silence, heavy as winter air before a storm. Emma knelt in front of the wheelchair, her face inches from his, her breath shaking. "Dad," she whispered, voice cracked open. "You almost fell." Gregory closed his eyes, jaw tight, trying to steady his breathing. "I'm fine," he muttered, but the words wobbled, the lie too thin to stand on. Camilla stepped back, giving father and daughter space, though her heart hammered with worry. Emma's son hovered close to her shoulder, watching the man he barely knew unravel in real time. Emma's voice softened, though pain still glimmered beneath it. "Why did you follow us?" she asked. "Why now?" Gregory swallowed hard. Pride flickered in him like a dying flame, fighting, resisting, refusing to surrender. Because, his voice failed. He stared past Emma, as if searching for a version of himself he could bear to confront. Because I heard my name. And I heard you read. His gaze flicked to the letter in her hand. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Everything he feared had found him anyway. Emma looked down at the paper, her fingers curling protectively around its edges. I wrote this, hoping you'd still choose us, she whispered. But when you didn't answer, I thought I didn't matter to you anymore. That admission broke something in the air, something fragile, something years old. Gregory's jaw trembled, the truth dragging itself out of him with visible pain. You mattered, he whispered back. You always did. I just didn't know how to face you, or the life I ruined. Camilla watched the exchange, feeling the ache radiating from both sides, the ache of love buried under years of silence. She stepped closer, her voice low and gentle. Pain doesn't disappear by pretending it doesn't exist, she said. You've both been hurting alone for so long. Maybe it's time to stop carrying it separately. Gregory looked at her, eyes hollow, then turned away, as if ashamed to let her witness his unraveling. But Emma didn't look away. She reached forward, placing a trembling hand on his knee. Dad, she murmured, why didn't you come that Christmas? Why didn't you read my letter? Gregory's throat tightened visibly. His eyes shone with something dangerously close to tears. I wanted to, he whispered. I wanted to, every day. His voice cracked. But every time I saw it, I saw your mother. I saw how I failed her, how I failed you. I thought if I ignored it, maybe the memories would hurt less. The confession shook him so deeply, his whole frame quivered. Emma's breath caught, every word sinking into her like stones dropped into water. For a long moment, she said nothing, only studied his face with a mixture of anger, grief, and something more tender. You didn't just lose Mom, she whispered. You lost me too, and you let it happen. Gregory squeezed his eyes shut. I know, he murmured. I know, and I hated myself too much to try again. The honesty in his voice was raw enough to burn. Her son stepped forward then, small hand reaching out to tentatively touch Gregory's arm. Grandpa, he said in a tiny voice, the title sounding both foreign and familiar. Gregory looked down, startled, as if seeing the boy for the first time, not as a reminder of the past, but as something living, something fragile, something that still needed him. The boy's touch softened something inside him that pride had held hostage for too long. His shoulders drooped, his chin trembled. Emma saw it, the shift, the breaking, the human vulnerability beneath the billionaire polish, and she exhaled, shaky and full of sorrow. Dad, she whispered, I don't know how to forgive everything, but I don't want to keep living like strangers, not anymore. The words hung in the air between them, trembling with possibility. Camilla felt her own chest tighten, knowing how fragile this moment was, how easily it could collapse or bloom. Gregory opened his eyes, meeting Emma's gaze directly for the first time in years. No arrogance, no coldness, no shields, just a man stripped bare by truth. Tell me how to try, he whispered. Please! His voice broke, finally, undeniably broke, and in that instant, an old wound cracked open wide enough for healing to begin, but not yet wide enough for redemption to finish. Gregory's request, tell me how to try, hung in the air like a fragile lantern, flickering between hope and fear. Emma stared at him, searching his face for the man she once loved, and the man who had pushed her away. For years, she had carried both versions of him inside her heart, never knowing which one was real. Now, for the first time, she saw them merging into one broken, complicated human being. Camilla stepped back, sensing the sacredness of the moment, as if the hallway itself had turned into holy ground. Emma inhaled slowly, steadying her breath. "Trying doesn't mean fixing everything at once," she whispered. "It means showing up. It means choosing us, even when it hurts." Gregory's hands shook on the armrests, but he didn't look away from his daughter. "I can do that," he said, voice thin but honest. "I want to do that." She nodded, tears trembling along her lashes. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the first step toward it. Her son shifted shyly, inching closer to Gregory. "Would you, come to my Christmas recital next year?" he asked, voice barely louder than a whisper. Gregory blinked, startled by the innocence of the question, by how little and how much it asked of him. "If you'll let me," he said softly. The boy nodded quickly, hope sparkling in his eyes like the lights on the Christmas tree. Something inside Gregory's chest loosened, a knot that had been cinched tight for far too long. Camilla felt her throat tighten at the sight. She had never expected to witness this fragile rewiring of a family trying to remember how to hold each other. Gregory cleared his throat, turning slightly toward her. "Camilla," he said, the name no longer sharp with condescension. "I owe you more than an apology." She shook her head, trying to deflect, but he raised a hand. "No, you forced me to look at my life. You pushed when everyone else walked away. That is worth more than pride." He reached for his phone, surprising everyone. "I'm calling my lawyer," he said. "He'll transfer the $1 million tonight. A bet is a bet." Camilla's breath froze. "Gregory, that money could change my whole life," she whispered. I don't know how to accept something so big." He gave a small, tired smile. "Then don't take it as a prize. Take it as an overdue debt, to you, to my daughter, to every moment I should have chosen humility and didn't." The sincerity in his voice softened every wall she still held. Emma watched the exchange with complicated eyes, grief, astonishment, gratitude, all woven together. After a long moment, she stepped closer to Camilla and touched her arm gently. "Thank you," she murmured, "for seeing him, for seeing us." Camilla swallowed past the lump in her throat. "I didn't do anything magical," she whispered. "I just didn't want any more broken people walking around pretending they weren't hurting." Emma nodded, understanding more than words could say. Gregory shifted in his chair, attempting to straighten his back the way Camilla had once guided him. To his surprise, the pain didn't stab as sharply this time. It eased, just a little, but real enough to feel. His eyes widened slightly. "It's different," he murmured. "Lighter." Camilla stepped closer, her voice gentle. "Because pain tied to regret doesn't loosen until truth is spoken. Tonight you opened the door you've been locking for years." Gregory exhaled shakily, absorbing her words like a man thawing slowly from ice. He glanced at Emma again, his voice trembling. "I can't promise I won't fail. I'm not good at this." Emma gave him a small, sad smile. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to stay." Her son nodded firmly, as if echoing a vow. For the first time in years, Gregory felt surrounded, not by wealth or status, but by the echo of a family he thought he had lost forever. The warmth of it seeped into him like the glow of a long-forgotten dawn. Camilla took a slow, steady breath. She felt the shift, subtle but unmistakable. The hallway no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like the quiet moment just before healing begins to bloom. She stepped back, giving the family room to breathe, her heart full and aching. This was not the miracle Gregory had mocked. It wasn't a spectacle or a trick. It was the miracle of honesty, of vulnerability, of choosing to forgive. A miracle born in the soft places of the soul. As Gregory reached for Emma's hand, hesitant, shaking, she took it with both of hers. The touch bridged years of silence in an instant. Their eyes met, and for the first time since everything fell apart, they faced the truth together. And in the quiet glow of the hallway, with Camilla watching just a few steps away, something shifted irrevocably. The miracle had begun, but its price and its promise were only just unfolding. The days that followed unfolded with a kind of quiet grace Camilla had never known before. Gregory kept his promise. He began attending physical therapy, not as a reluctant patient, but as a man finally willing to face the weight he'd carried for years. Each morning, the therapy room filled with winter sunlight, warming the polished floors and casting long golden lines across the equipment. Residents exercised slowly beneath wool blankets, murmuring encouragement to one another. And beside Gregory, some days shy, some days brave, stood his grandson, counting each step with soft determination. Emma appeared often too, though cautiously at first. She stood by the wall during the early sessions, arms crossed, unsure how much space she was allowed to reclaim in her father's life. But over time, she drifted closer, asking small questions, offering small smiles, learning again how to speak to the man she thought she'd lost. Each interaction between them felt like a fragile thread being tied back together. Gregory's back, though still stiff, moved with more ease each day, as if forgiveness had begun loosening muscles no doctor could reach. Camilla watched the transformation with a fullness in her chest she didn't know how to name. She had not expected to become part of these mornings, yet Gregory insisted she observe his progress, claiming her insight mattered. When he faltered, he no longer hid it behind mockery. When he succeeded, his pride softened instead of sharpening into arrogance. More than once, Camilla saw him pause mid-exercise to simply look at his daughter, his eyes carrying a gratitude he never said aloud. Those silent glances were worth more than money. Perhaps they always had been. Her own life, too, began shifting in a direction she had once believed was closed to her. With Gregory's payment, wired quickly without ceremony, she paid the overdue rent, cleared the medical debts, and filled her grandmother's prescriptions without fear. Their apartment, though still small, felt safer now, lighter somehow. But the greatest change arrived one crisp morning when her phone buzzed with an unexpected email from the nursing program she once had to abandon. A spot had opened. A new semester was starting, and they wanted her back. She sat at the kitchen table, the sun catching the edges of the acceptance letter, her breath trembling with disbelief. Her grandmother cried softly when she heard the news, wiping her eyes with the corner of her apron. "Dios te abrió la puerta otra vez," she whispered. God opened the door again. Her little brother hugged her tightly, already imagining her in a white coat. For the first time in years, Camilla felt the future approach with gentle footsteps rather than harsh demands. But accepting meant stepping into a life she had once lost. It meant courage. A few days later, at Sterling Oaks, she found Gregory finishing a set of careful steps with his walker, breath steady, posture straighter than she'd ever seen. Emma encouraged him from the side, smiling with a pride she no longer tried to hide. When Gregory noticed Camilla, he offered a soft nod. No grandeur, no theatrics, just sincerity. "I heard the news," he said. "You're going back to school." She nodded, shyly. "If I'm brave enough." Gregory's eyes softened in a way that carried the weight of a hard-earned truth. "You are," he said quietly. "Braver than you realize." Then, with that same fragile humility he was still learning to stand inside, he added, "I'd like to cover the entire tuition, not as a reward, as a thank you, and I want to set up a scholarship here under your name, for other students who just need one person to believe in them." Camilla's breath caught. She felt the generosity as both a gift and a responsibility, heavy and luminous. "It's too much," she whispered, but Gregory shook his head gently. "It's not enough," he replied. And for once, she believed him. On her way home that evening, Camilla stepped into a small church near the bus stop, drawn by the soft glow of candles flickering behind stained glass. The sanctuary was empty, save for a few poinsettias and a simple nativity scene arranged near the altar. She sat on one of the wooden pews, warm light washing over her, and let the quiet steady her thoughts. A new life waited for her, one she had dreamed of, lost and found again. But stepping into it meant leaving behind the version of herself who had only ever survived. Becoming someone who could heal meant choosing a path she feared might break her before it strengthened her. She lifted her eyes toward the small, glowing manger scene, feeling something within her shift, soft but undeniable. She loved her family. She needed this chance. She also feared it with every beat of her heart, her hands clasped tightly as she whispered a question into the echoing stillness. "Am I brave enough to change everything?" Her voice trembled, dissolving into the candlelit quiet. As she rose from the pew and stepped toward the door, cold air brushed her face, carrying the scent of pine and distant carols. She paused on the church steps, the world before her wide and uncertain, but illuminated by a hope she hadn't felt in years. And in that still moment, with the night stretching open before her, Camilla realized something unmistakable. The next chapter of her life would demand more courage than any miracle so far, but she wasn't sure yet if she was ready to walk into it. 1 year later, Sterling Oaks glowed beneath a canopy of soft winter lights, the air humming with quiet carols drifting from the chapel. Camilla stepped through the doors in her crisp nursing student uniform, her hair pulled back neatly, her hands warm inside new gloves. She had grown in ways she hadn't imagined, steadier, stronger, more grounded in her purpose. The staff greeted her with smiles, residents lifted their hands in recognition, and the building that once held only humiliation now welcomed her like family. Tonight was the Christmas service, and it pulsed with gentle reverence. Inside the chapel, warm candlelight shimmered across polished wood pews. Residents sat bundled in soft shawls, whispering greetings, their eyes bright with anticipation. Emma and her son waved from the front row, faces glowing with warmth. Gregory sat beside them, no longer in a wheelchair, but leaning proudly on a cane carved with subtle oak leaves. When he saw Camilla approach, his entire expression softened with gratitude. He looked smaller, humbler, and deeply, quietly whole. Camilla took a seat near the aisle, her heart swelling as the service began. The choir of residents sang Silent Night, their voices thin but full of devotion, rising like small lanterns toward the vaulted ceiling. She watched Emma rest her head lightly on her father's shoulder, the kind of touch once impossible between them. Gregory closed his eyes, breathing evenly, a man finally freed from the weight of pride and regret. The miracle she had witnessed last year had not vanished. It had grown. After the hymns, the director of Sterling Oaks stepped forward with a warm smile. "Tonight," she announced, "we honor those whose acts of courage brought light to places once dim." She gestured to Gregory, who rose slowly, leaning on his cane. Then she nodded toward Camilla. "And we celebrate the beginning of the Camilla Reyes Scholarship, which has already opened doors for students in need." Applause filled the chapel, soft, emotional, sincere. Camilla bowed her head, tears gathering behind her lashes. Gregory met her gaze across the room, his eyes shining. When he spoke, his voice carried with gentle strength. "I once believed miracles were foolish. Now I know they often appear in the hands of ordinary people who refuse to give up on compassion." He extended a hand toward Emma, who took it without hesitation. "This year," he said, "I'm grateful for second chances. And for the woman who helped me find mine. Camilla felt her breath catch, the moment washing over her like warm light. After the service, people filtered into the lobby for warm cider and cookies. Camilla stood near the fireplace, watching Gregory laugh softly with his grandson as they examined handmade ornaments. Emma joined her, slipping an arm around her shoulders. "He's been different," she whispered. "Open, kind, present. We owe that to you." Camilla shook her head gently. "You owe it to each other." Emma smiled, knowing the truth lived somewhere in between. The night felt peaceful, as if the world had exhaled. When Camilla stepped out into the cool air, snowflakes drifted gently around her, rare for this town, light as blessings. She walked toward the garden, where a single lamppost cast golden light over the frosted path. There she paused, letting the stillness settle deep inside her. She was becoming the person she had always dreamed of being, and this place, this story, had shaped her far more than she ever expected. Footsteps approached behind her. Gregory appeared beside her slowly, leaning on his cane, his breath visible in the cold air. "You helped heal more than pain," he said quietly. "You helped heal a family." She smiled softly. "And you helped heal yourself." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Not alone." They stood for a moment in the quiet garden, watching their breath rise like small prayers. For the first time, Gregory looked at peace with his past, his family, and himself. Camilla turned toward the entrance, hearing laughter spill from the lobby. She knew her journey was only beginning. Nursing school, long nights of study, new challenges waiting just beyond the horizon. But for the first time, the future felt bright, not intimidating. She glanced back at the chapel windows glowing behind her, their light reflecting softly across the garden. The story that had begun in humiliation had carried her to healing, purpose, and a deeper understanding of grace. And as she stepped through the doors of Sterling Oaks one last time that night, a quiet, hopeful thought rose in her heart like a blessing. Miracles are not accidents, they are choices. If this story touched your heart, leave a heart in the comments, subscribe for more stories of kindness and redemption, and click the final screen video to begin another journey.